else that stands for? Are y'all too young? A rap group? Boogie Down Productions? KRS-One? It's gonna be long. I mean, that's the thing, like, I'm not entirely sure what everyone is expecting tonight, because I think the original impulse of this was to kind of talk about environmental justice issues. And then when I said, like, I don't really know anything about environmental justice issues. And I mean, that's not entirely true, but it's not really my, like, main focus of work, right? So we talked about kind of this idea of climate and what climate means in a broader sense, and then that brought us to activism, and then I'm also an artist. So there's gonna be a lot of stuff going on tonight. I think, just to lay it out in terms of what I'd like to do. One, I'm not an expert on anything in any sense of that word, so this is very much more me hopefully facilitating a conversation about some of these issues and not just me talking actually, although I do have some stuff to share. So I want to talk a little bit about that word climate and what that word means in a bunch of different ways. Then I want to talk a little bit and share a model of social change and activism that's been really helpful for me in terms of thinking about how I fit into this world of, hopefully doing something positive in your community or whatever. And then I want to do some poems, and those poems will each kind of illuminate a different thing that we've already talked about, and then we can just hang out and ask questions or whatever. At any point, if you have a question or comment, please feel free to jump in. Just out of curiosity, I was here like a few months ago in like April or May. Were any of you at that show?
We loved every second of you.
Just you two? Okay, cool. Just because, like, I don't want to repeat myself too much. So I have some new stuff that I'll share, but I'm probably some of the same stuff, so I apologize if you've heard it before. Let's see. So, any questions so far? Does that sound okay? Again, like I said, I think the word climate can mean a lot of different things. I'm going to be writing up here, it's more so for my own processing, so like, hopefully you can read my writing, but if not, like, I'm sure it will be cool. But I like to write when I talk. So, I guess just the first thing I'd like to ask, like, when you hear the word climate, what pops into your head? You just say, weather. Alright, so I'm going to extrapolate out from what you said and say environmental justice. I know that's not what you said, but usually when people hear the word climate in a social justice context, I think it often points to, like you're saying, like weather, climate change, global warming, blah, blah, blah. And then in a broader sense, environmental justice, which is a huge topic and covers a lot of ground. But before we key in on this one, like what other things come to mind when you hear about the word climate?
Social climate.
Okay. Can you expand on that at all?
So like if there happens to be like a neighborhood that's particularly prone to violence, like there's a high social climate there.
Interesting. Definitely. I think that can also relate in some sense to campus climate. I mean, that was a really big phrase when I was in school a couple of years ago. Is that still something that people talk about, campus climate?
Yep.
Can anyone define that? Or like say what they think it means?
Campus climate is kind of like the acceptance of different diversity groups on campus, and like how well people feel involved in campus, and like how well they feel at home.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the environment that is created by whether different organizations or different structures within the university, or just like the general tone of the population in terms of how welcoming, how, I guess, effective the classes are, how effective the community is for any specific group, whether that's a minority group or a majority group or whatever we're talking about. So definitely. Any others? Any other thoughts? When you hear the word climate?
Political climate?
Okay, yeah. Can you expand on that at all?
Well, like the opinions on different politicians in a certain area, like this place has a climate of democratic climate.
Definitely. What would you say the political climate is here at UW-Stout? Or is that too, like, would we get off on a tangent if I asked? Well, the only other one I would throw up here, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, is the idea of, I guess, the word conditions. And creating conditions, creating a climate where change is possible. And that can relate to any sort of community, whether that's a small community like a household, or a neighborhood, or a campus, or a country, or a state, or the entire world, or whatever. But climate as the conditions on the ground that allow or don't allow change to happen. And that's, we'll come back to that because that's kind of a complicated topic. But basically, like I said, I'm not a super huge environmental justice genius or anything like that. But I think the thing that ties all of this together, and the thing that I would like to focus on for the most of the night, if it's okay with everyone, is this idea of activism. Because I think each one of these things relates very directly to this idea of activism. And activism, I think, gets a really bad rap a lot of times. Just in terms of when people hear the word, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm gonna throw a brick through the Starbucks window, or I can only eat this kind of food, or else I'm a bad person, or whatever. And to me, activism, we'll talk more about what it means, but in a very general sense, it's just what are you doing in your life to actively make your community, your climate, your space better, however you define better. A lot of stuff I'm going to talk about today, you'll see when we get to the poetry, I identify as a progressive, whatever. But a lot of this stuff is pretty apolitical. When we talk about activism, that can be whatever your politics are. This applies to what you're doing, I guess. And I guess before we move on, I just want to quick shout out the quote. I'm sure many of you have heard it before, but you must be the change you wish to see in the world. People heard that before? Who said it? Okay. I think that's the most misinterpreted quote in the world. Or it's I think a very often misinterpreted quote. I think sometimes when people hear that quote, they think that it means that if you want the world to be better, you as one individual have to be perfect. You have to do all the right things all the time to make your world better. And I think, it's great if you are perfect, if you do all the right things, and if you, strive to make conscious choices or whatever. But to me, that quote really gets to the heart of what we're talking about here. If you want your climate, your world, your community to be better, you have to actively make it better. Things don't ever change by themselves. Another quote, if we're longer talking about quotes, is Howard Zinn says you can't stand still on a moving train, right? If the train is going in one direction and you're not moving, you're still going in that direction. So a lot of what we're talking about tonight is how do we actively control the climate in terms of all of these different ways of thinking about it. Does that make sense? Cool. So, I guess I just wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about change. So, when you think back to your own life experiences, when you think back to any history that you've learned in class or anything like that, where does change come from? Whether political change, social change, cultural change, where does change come from? I just want to brainstorm a big list.
The individual.
Well, the individual doing what? That's good.
Starting something new, let people pick up on it, and eventually leads to large scale change.
Okay. The snowball. What other ways have individuals or communities created change throughout history?
Don't be shy, guys.
If you want a microphone, otherwise you can just yell things at me. I mean, one of them is coming up in a couple weeks, right? So voting is one way that change can happen. I'm not saying it's the best way or the only way, but we're trying to make a big list of where change comes from. Any others?
A provoking thought or idea.
Okay. So, an example of that could be, well, I have an example. Did y'all have an example?
Quotes.
Books.
Quotes.
Quotes. Definitely. So, you say something, maybe you're famous already, people pick up on it, and it goes on to influence people for many, many years. Definitely. I was thinking, the one specific one that always pops in my head is, I never remember who it is. I think it was, either Mary Shelley or Mary Shelley's husband, Percy Shelley, who wrote a bunch of poems in England during the 1800s about child labor. And because people actually read poetry back then, it actually had an impact, a physical, concrete impact on child labor laws. So like art, that's another one. Yeah, that's good. Art is definitely one way. Any others? Like when you think of like the civil rights movement, how was what was accomplished during the civil rights movement accomplished?
People.
Okay, so protest, definitely. Protest can take the form of rallies, marches, boycotts,
Sit-ins.
sit-ins, definitely.
Media.
Huh?
Media.
Media, definitely.
Asking questions.
Asking questions. So interpersonal kind of contact, one-on-one, or something like this, like one person talking to a group of people or having a conversation, definitely.
Challenging authority.
How can we challenge authority?
By not giving up your seat on the bus. One big example.
I mean, people know about another like really current example right now in Minneapolis, where I'm from. There's a so everyone knows that Occupy happened, and then it kind of went away. I mean, it didn't really go away, but it's not as big as it was at one point, right? Well, in Minneapolis, Occupy kind of evolved into this other group called Occupy Homes Minneapolis, where they go into foreclosed homes and help defend those homes for the families, not for, with the families living in those homes, against the banks. And when the police come to evict them, they'll like chain themselves up in the home. The police have to go away, and they've won victory after victory after victory. So this just shows that sometimes challenging authority can lead to concrete changes. The banks are now not so quick to refuse to negotiate with the city of Minneapolis, and that's something that's spreading to other communities too. Any others before we move on?
Education.
Definitely. So well, I think educating yourself, but also taking part in education, whether as a teacher, as a facilitator, as an educational policy person, policy manager, whatever. This is good. I need like 5. Alright. So I'll just share with you real quick. I don't want to like lecture too much because I want to talk, but also get to the poetry stuff. But something that's just been really, really helpful for me as an individual, as an activist, helpful for me to understanding kind of all this stuff, making sense of it in a framework that I think, it's just been, it just makes sense to me. So basically, I think about change at 4 different places. I don't say levels because it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just 4 separate, interrelated things. The first one is personal. So personal change can mean, the individual choices that you make. So reading books about the issues that you care about, or taking a class about the issue that you care about, learning more, becoming more knowledgeable. It can also mean personal, like physical choices, like not driving a car because cars pollute, or I'm drinking a bottle of water, which is bad, but maybe you don't use bottled water, maybe you have a canteen that you use. Being a vegetarian is a personal choice you can make if you don't like the way that animals are factory farmed or whatever. We'll come back to each one of these, so I'll just touch on that first. Second one is interpersonal. And that's, like what we talked about a little bit already, anything where you're talking to or with other people face to face. So definitely education can be part of that. Media, if you write an op-ed for the newspaper and that op-ed influences some people, that's great. This can also mean, so like volunteering. Again, anything that's face-to-face, in real time, on the ground. Volunteering, direct service work, maybe you tutor little kids after school, or anything like that. Again. Next one is institutional change. And to me, that just refers to anything that physically changes the mechanism of how things work in the world. So like changing the law. If you, take your case of whatever injustice happened to you, take it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes a decision that changes the law in the world or whatever. Or you lobby or you run for office to become a politician, or you lobby politicians to change specific laws. Or maybe just right here in campus, like maybe you want gender-neutral restrooms. at campus. So you get together with some people and you organize around that issue. You state your case to whoever's in charge of the restrooms here on campus and say, this is what we want. Here are 1,000 signatures on a petition, or here's the legal precedent for this, or whatever, however you organize, and then you get it done. So this, to me, is a lot of the activism, organizing stuff, is in order to create large-scale, lasting, sustainable change. And then the last one, I would say, is just cultural, this idea of not just changing the way things work, but changing the actual hearts and minds of people. And that takes a long time. Can people hear me? I'm sorry, is that okay? I'm not loud enough? I'm usually loud enough, but I want to make sure. Because I can use the mic too. So yeah, long-term hearts and minds change, different trends, cultural trends, artistic trends, all that kind of stuff. Actually changing the way people feel about issues. So, the thing about this framework that I've kind of pulled out of my whatever, that's helped me is that, again, no one level is necessarily more important in every context. Like in a certain context, one level might be more important. But in general, we need all four of these things happening all the time for change to actually happen. So an example might be, many of us know that one person in our lives who's like a genius and knows everything about a particular issue and is so smart and is always like calling you out for not understanding the way things really are, but then they don't actually like do anything about that. They don't take part in their community. They don't know who their neighbors are. They don't take part in any type of activism around that issue. They just know everything. And they're really educated and informed. The opposite example could be someone who is all about like smashing the system or whatever, and like, yeah, we're gonna change everything, but they don't take the time to do the critical self-reflection that it takes to become a good activist, to become not good, to become an effective activist. They just want to go out there and, again, whether that's throwing bricks through windows or punching cops or whatever it is, you need both of these. And then, I mean, it works for these ones too. I mean, the old saying is, thought without action is a daydream. Action without thought is a nightmare. So we need both, not both, but all of these things happening all the time for change to really happen. Does that make sense? And the thing I think that can be challenging sometimes is figuring out how you, as one individual, fit into this framework. Because while we need all of this happening all the time for change around any issue to happen, that doesn't mean that me as one individual has to always be doing everything all the time. Like, just as an example, like we need teachers, right? We need good teachers who work with students one-on-one or one-on-30 or whatever it is to, educate them and do all that. But we also need people doing educational policy. We also need, the people who shape curriculum that goes out to all of the teachers. So we need both. It can't just be one or the other. And it can be hard to, again, figure out how you fit into that. And I have a poem about that I'll do later, but it's something that I've struggled with a lot. So, again, this framework is based on my personal history as an activist, but also just on an understanding of history. So, like, again, if you take the civil rights movement as an example, how many of you studied the civil rights movement in, like, high school or in college? And I think it's, one of the most famous examples of this working and being effective in all of history. You can see how the civil rights movement, how every piece kind of fit in. So, for example, the easiest one to look at is on the institutional level, laws were changed, right? The Voting Rights Act, various kinds of civil rights acts. Right now in Minnesota, we have a photo ID referendum on the ballot right now that is kind of an example of this, for me in the opposite direction, but an example of institutional change that in the civil rights movement helped people vote. Right now, probably not helping people vote. But that's just one example. There are a lot of laws that change. School desegregation is an example of an institutional change. But also on an interpersonal level, what did people do on people got on buses, right? And traveled all around the South, educating people who had never voted before on how to vote. So again, very face-to-face, direct service, volunteer type work, but really, really important. And on a personal level, you have people who chose to read the newspapers and watch the nightly news. and see what was happening in places where marches were happening, seeing the fire hoses and the dogs and all that kind of stuff. And this, helps lead to this. Little by little, all of these things lead to, not there yet, obviously, but some sort of cultural shift in the way that things work. And again, it's an ecosystem of stuff happening for change to really be effective. But I think a good maybe case study would be to look at something like environmental justice. So if any of you are with the green organization, what was it called?
Green Sense.
Green Sense. Or if you're not, you're just interested in, the future. How could we kind of fill in each blank in an environmental justice framework, just as a case study, because this works for every issue, whether you're, an anti-police brutality advocate or, a campus activist, you're with the USAS or whatever. Whatever you do, this can work. But let's just use environmental justice as an example. On a personal level, what are things that individuals can do to create a more environmentally just world?
Recycle.
Yeah, definitely. Recycle. Any other thoughts?
Pick up trash.
Yeah. Very good. I took a positive thing and made it negative. Pick up trash.
Public transportation.
Yeah. Bus. Or the bike. Or the walk.
Turn off the faucet.
Yeah, don't waste water. Don't waste water. We keep going, but I think that's good. Like, again, individual choices that people make that maybe, seem really small, but add up over time. What about interpersonal? What are things we can do on an interpersonal level? So again, talking to the people in our families or our communities or media stuff fits in here too. Like, for example, it's one thing we didn't mention before. Social media. I think social media gets a bad rap. Like, have you ever heard the term slacktivism? People say that, like, Facebook and Twitter is slacktivism. It's not real activism. It's just like, oh, I changed my profile picture to combat domestic violence or whatever. But I think even though social media by itself doesn't change the world, it does have an impact. It's a form of interpersonal activism. If you post, an article in a newspaper about something that you think people should know about, and you have 500 Facebook friends, and 100 of them see it, that's 100 people who learn something. And that's good. So that's one example. So again, in an environmental justice context, it might be you post a link to an article about tar sands or about whatever pipeline or about whatever is important to you right now in that context. Any others?
Student orgs.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Like, there's student organizations that are focused on environmental activism, like the Green Sense, or there's a Sustainable Agriculture Education Association and the Natural Areas Club on campus, and they're kind of focused around issues under this context.
That's really good. I'm actually I think it fits under both of these, but I'm gonna put it down here. Join an organization. Because to me, like, if you leave here with one thing, I think this is the most important way that people create change is by joining organizations. Because again, looking at this huge framework, it's all really complex and abstract and difficult to figure out how you fit in. The best way is to join an organization. One person by themselves may not make a difference in whatever issue, but one person in an organization can make a huge difference. An organization may only have 5 people. So if you join, that's a huge, a huge difference in what they're trying to do. Well, definitely. And then organizations oftentimes are trying to create institutional change in some sort of way. But organizations can also try to create interpersonal change. It doesn't matter. Any other interpersonal ones that people have?
Just like talking with people about things that need to be talked about and acting decent to each other.
Definitely. So having conversations with your friends or your family or whatever about maybe some of this stuff or about whatever your organization is doing at a given time. Just talking to people. Like when we talk about community and stuff, like that's what it's all about. Just existing as a decent human being in your community and having conversations. Are there any more for the institutional level? Again, things that one person can do to create institutional change. Large-scale, systemic, sustainable change. That's good. So this is a good pair actually. Join an organization versus running for office. I guess that's not what you said. Like you could run for office, or you could support someone who's running for office, or voting. I think goes in here too a little bit. That's right. This is a mess. I'm sorry. Any other thoughts?
Start a petition.
Petition, yeah. Petition. I mean, you can also put like boycott in here if there's a store or a service or whatever that you think a boycott can have an effect on. Definitely. Because all of this stuff has worked in the past. A lot of times we look at some of this stuff like, oh, that doesn't matter. Like, I would shop at Walmart, but Walmart still exists, like whatever. But boycotts have worked time and time again throughout the past. They just have to be organized. And so some boycotts maybe are less effective than others, but that doesn't mean that boycotts don't work. The same with petitions. Signing your name on an email petition may not seem like the biggest deal, but if the conditions are right, again, a lot of what we're talking about here is creating a climate in which change can happen. A petition can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. You never know. Same with voting. Any thoughts on the cultural side of it? What are ways that we can change the culture around environmental justice? Change people's hearts and minds about it, make them actually care about it. It's a hard one.
Well, I guess you could attempt to link it to how they feel. Like, if somebody doesn't have a direct connection with the issues you're talking about, or have to deal with, maybe find a way to connect.
Definitely. I mean, that's a lot of stuff, but I mean, I can wrap it up kind of as media and art. Like, art and media are both ways that you can make those connections for people. Definitely. And I mean, this one is for me, a lot bigger and more abstract and harder to kind of wrap my head around. But I think you kind of hit it right on the head in terms of what that's all about. But sometimes, like, again, the institutional change might come first. Again, using the civil rights movement as an example, like, schools were desegregated by law. It didn't mean that people right away were like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, this came first, and then, eventually, not everywhere to the same extent, but eventually the shift happened in terms of the culture too. And again, not just the civil rights movement, you can look at the labor movement, the women's rights movement, movement against apartheid in South Africa, all these different movements that have been successful over the years. Right? You can do this point-by-point list for each one of them. The other one I know this might not be as exciting as me like jumping up and down and doing poems or whatever and rapping, but I think this is really important to wrap your head around. The other kind of case study I really wanted to look at was that other way of thinking about climate, which is campus climate. Social justice on kind of an individual, identity-based level. So let's do the same thing. On a personal level, what can one person do to make their campus climate better?
Be nice to people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, attitude. It's been a really long couple of days, but yeah, it's good. Attitude. So like, be nice, be a decent human being. But looking at that, going off of that, is it enough to just not be a horrible person? Like, what are ways that you can, be a good person? Well, I guess you said be nice, which definitely fits into that. But can you go beyond that?
Be an ally on campus.
Definitely. And I was going to ask, so what does that entail? But that's like a huge question, right? Like, what does it mean to be an ally? We could talk for a whole hour and a half on that. So I think I'll just relate that to this idea of critical self-reflection. If you really care about social justice or about campus climate or about just, I don't like using all the jargony words, like you just care about the people around you, like a lot of it is critical self-reflection. Like sit down and be quiet and just think about the way that you interact with people. Think about your privilege, if you're a person with privilege, not even if you're at a college, everyone has some measure of privilege. Think about what that means and the way that that impacts the conversations you have, the way that that impacts the relationships you have, et cetera, et cetera. And part of critical self-reflection is, self-education. So, read books about that kind of stuff, or like take a class about that kind of stuff. Go to an organization and sit down and be like, what kind of information do you have for me about this? I want to be a better ally to women or the LGBT community or students of color or whatever. Any others for personal? Okay, how about interpersonal? Again, talking about campus climate, making this campus a more, inclusive isn't really the best word, it's kind of toothless, right? But like making it a more just community, a place where everyone not only feels welcome, but actually is welcome. I think one that can go over is conversations. So, as an example, if you hear, if one of your friends says like a racist joke or a homophobic joke, like you can challenge them on that. And that's hard. That can be really uncomfortable, but it's also really, really important. Because again, sometimes it's these little face-to-face interactions that really change the way people view the world and view themselves. And a small conversation can have a huge impact. Any others? I guess again, going back to here, social media, and not just social media, but I think media in general. If you are someone who's done a lot of this work and like you feel pretty good about your understanding and your grasp of campus climate issues and identity issues and privilege and social justice and blah blah blah, you can write an article about it for the student newspaper or for your blog, or post a link to that article you wrote on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr and try to get a bunch of people to read it and comment on it and respond to it and just start a conversation. So social media is really important. Media is really important. Art, even though art, belongs out here, it also belongs up here. Like, do a video project on some aspect of campus climate that is important to you. That kind of stuff can be really impactful, even if it's small. Any others? Or any thoughts on the institutional side? I'll stop right now.
As far as like media goes, it's important too to like hold media accountable for being untruthful or to challenge maybe media being racist or sexist or homophobic.
Definitely. So if
we can challenge our friends and our peers, but we can also use social media to challenge, popular media or words that reach larger audiences.
I think a great example of that, to be concrete and specific, is what's the mascot of UW-Stout? Blue Devils. What did it used to be? How long ago was that? Does anybody know? Any professors in here? Because it wasn't always the Blue Devils, right?
We were not in high school.
Oh, am I thinking about the high school? Because they changed their name too, right? Or they changed their name.
Yeah, they're the Indians.
What are they now? The what? Mustang. And how does anyone know how that happened? Sorry?
Wasn't there a huge lawsuit? There was a school in Wisconsin that all the students, the community there was a big Native American community. I don't know where in Wisconsin, but their mascot was an Indian, and they'd at the rallies and stuff, the Native American community always thought they were making fun of them and making their whole tradition a joke. So the whole Native American community came together. They started a petition. It went to, the government level. They went to many court hearings, and that's how it got. Now I think it's a law in Wisconsin, or it's about to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the broader context, but I got it mixed up with the college. I thought it was the college, but yeah, now that y'all reminded me, in high school. Last time I was here, they told me about this whole process where it was, partly public stuff like the petition and media campaign, writing op-eds to the newspaper, but partly behind doors, institutional stuff like getting lawyers. And that combination of things ended up changing it and challenging that paradigm. Yeah, that's a stupid word to use, but I think it fits. And then again, when we talk about long-term cultural change, sometimes that's after this other thing has happened. You know, it's never going to go back. Well, I shouldn't say that. You should never say that. But hopefully, you know, the name, they're not going to change the mascot back because this has shifted. People have kind of internalized and understood that why that was offensive or whatever. Maybe they haven't, but the new generation will. And that's just another example. We've done example after example after example. Does that all make sense? Are there any like challenges to that, or questions, or other examples people can think of, or anything? Any other thoughts? While I drink some water. Cool. Well, again, this isn't some like scientific thing that I made up. It's just something that's just the way I think about it. And it's been really helpful for me to figure out how I fit into this framework. And hopefully it is for you too. Hey. I don't know if I'll use it so I'm not like bouncing back and forth. So, yeah, like you were saying, I'm a poet. I'm a 2-time national poetry slam champion. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm also a rapper. And I've been doing that for a long time too. And I have some pieces that I can share that just kind of illuminate some of this stuff, because like someone was saying over there, when we talk about media and art, cultural change, and sometimes interpersonal change too, a lot of it has to come through not thinking about these issues abstractly. Because it's very easy to stand up on stage, and I always use this as an example, but like, racism is bad, let's not be racist. Like, you might agree with that, but it's not very interesting. It's not very convincing if you don't agree with that. So a lot of it is like putting a human face on these issues, making them, you know, come to life for people in some sort of way. So I'm gonna share a few pieces. And again, if people have questions or thoughts, feel free to jump in. I took my glasses off, so you might just have to interrupt me. Not like during the talk, but like whenever. So I might not see you raising your hand. Is that cool? Can I do a few pieces? I haven't done this one in a long time, so I hope I remember it. But I started doing this piece regularly around the time of the Trayvon Martin shooting. And I think the thesis of this poem, if there is one, is this idea that there's a difference between, you know, a bad thing happening and a bad thing happening because. A lot of times I think we think of all the tragedies that happen as tragedies, as, you know, an act of God, an unavoidable mistake. I think in reality, a lot of the bad things that happen in our society, on our campus, in our lives, in whatever our climate is, happen for a reason, right? Like, there are people who benefit from it. There are causes in place that make these things more likely to happen. So that's what this poem is about. I probably ruined it by telling you all that. Finally, we find a court free of teenagers, and we stand unsure of ourselves, 7 years between us. But then that ball hits the blacktop, and we are snapped back into our loose-fitting lives. Basketball may lack the storied history of baseball or the bone-crunching majesty of football, but it is the great American sport, and this is why. See, if you pay attention to movies or Saturday morning cartoons, you'd learn that American boys naturally group themselves into circles of 5. The leader, the sidekick, the smart guy, the big guy, and the crazy guy. Or point guard, shooting guard, small forward, center, and power forward. And 7 years ago, we wore these skins like oversized throwbacks, loosely but proudly. We believed. Never played for no high school, played for our neighborhood, played for our pride, sharp as the summer, natural as sweat, played for girls we still dream about sometimes. Tonight, we play 2-on-2. 7 years, whispering over our shoulders, under our sneakers, swirling in the space between us, the space where your once ever-present laughter would be. 7 years can pass so quickly, like a winning senior season, like OT in a playoff game, like college for me, like boot camp for you, like that email I never responded to that can pass like the flash of a roadside bomb. I've been passing a lot. Content to just watch my old friends and try to capture something I know I can't hold on to. Our 5 went to prison. The only one of us to actually get better at the game, but his play now is hard, triple teamed by shadows at all times. He travels. None of us has the guts to say anything. Our 4 lost his job and his health insurance with it, so he just camps out on the 3-point line, waiting. Our 3 got rich, got married, and got soft, and you, me. Your mind is always 1,000 miles away when you find the ball in your hands, wide open. So I take my first shot of the game. My first shot in 7 years, a jumper from just inside the 3-point line, top of the key, no problem. I feel that ball rotate out of my hand like God giving birth to a new planet. And watch it sail over the backboard, over the fence, and into the darkness. When you died, I needed both hands to count the number of people who tried to tell me how natural that was. How you believed in what you were fighting for, as if that made you right. How losing the people you care about is just part of growing up. Like paying your taxes, like turning the music down. When you died, your mother told me, everything happens for a reason. And I don't think she was talking about God. Because when you shed your skin, you're supposed to have a new one underneath. There are some things you don't outgrow. There are some things you don't just lose along the journey of life. There are some things that must be taken from you. And we accepted growing old. We accepted the fact that we would never be 17 again. But standing here, like the 5 horsemen of American apocalypse, war, prison, poverty, greed, apathy, and war, I understood. This is what they take from us. The politicians or teachers or cops or our parents or each other. Anyone who ever told us that this life is natural, that the way things are is the way things have always been and always will be. This is what they take from us. 10 points and 10 rebounds every game. Those ugly-ass cross-trainers you used to play in, that smile, like you knew the ball was going in before it ever left your hands, like it was inevitable. There is a difference between tragedy and injustice, between losing and being lost. The mosquitoes pinch me awake. I run off to get the ball. You're the only one of us laughing. I realized halfway through that I made the mistake of starting with my longest poem and also just one of the most emotionally draining poems, so I'm sorry for that, but I didn't want to start with it for a different reason, though. This idea that, again, when we talk about climate, in the broader sense of the word, that climate isn't just there. Like, we can shape that. Other people can shape that. What's the quote we were just talking about? Who said that? This idea that the system isn't broken. Like, people always talk about how the system's broken, both on the left and the right. People are like, the system is broken, the system is broken, and like, the system does just what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to oppress people. It's supposed to make people's lives harder. And it's our job to change that system. Not fix it, to change it. I think that's a really important thing, a way to frame this whole idea of activism and social justice. And then the other thing about that piece is this idea of, who was it? Bertolt Brecht. The quote from him is, "Art is not a mirror to reflect reality. It's a hammer with which we shape it." And I think that is, particularly relevant to artists, but I think to everyone, we don't have to be content with the way things are. We can actively take part in changing the way things are. You don't have to be a genius to do that. You don't have to be special or rich or whatever. And that's what this one is about. This is from my new album. I'm not going to do a lot of rapping tonight, but I wanted to at least share this one. Because on the album is a song called The Pragmatist's Guide to Revolution. We're all grown, right? Like I can curse. I'm fighting on till my life is gone, even when my version of health insurance is orange juice and Tiger Balm. Even when my attention is so divided between rapping and writing and activism and surviving, and at any given time, so many of us are new to this. But you ain't gotta stop listening to Ludacris, and you ain't gotta dress a certain way, ride your bike in wintertime, shop at the co-op, and ever turn away from who you really are. This movement doesn't need perfect, it just needs us to start working. Radical means you have hope. And sometimes you vote for it, most of the time though you don't. So this is for the ballot, the bullet, the bulletin, and the boycott, for the hand-to-hand and the door-to-door. More and more is growing in popularity. We don't say peace, we say solidarity. Fuck a conspiracy theory, that ain't right. The worst they do is always in plain sight. I ain't concerned about black helicopters. It wasn't the Illuminati who shot Sean and Oscar. I ain't looking for symbols on dollar bills and monuments or reading Nostradamus' prophecies of apocalypse. I got enough problems in my neighborhood. Unemployment, schools underfunded. So take a good look at the books, it doesn't add up. So what's up? It doesn't take a new world order to fuck us. So flip that switch off. I don't think 9/11 was an inside job. And even if it is suspicious, our mission is the same. Resist, revolt, rebel. Remember every name. We live, we vote, we yell. The pressure doesn't change, whether on Republicans or Democrats or space lizards. All right, it's like this. I got a friend who ran for city council and he got elected. I got a friend who ran for school board and got rejected, but in the process, learned about the process, wrote a couple grants, now she runs a nonprofit. I got a friend who never went to college, but knows the first and last names of everyone in his housing project. It starts with the basics. I got another friend who throws parties in his basement, and basically, that's just the baseline. Power is 100 people in the same place at the same time. What you gonna do with it? I got a friend who knows what the revolution is and knows that the music is beautiful, it's the people that it brings together who are better, and the senators and representatives will only bend to the will of the real change makers, my friends. That's a song I've been writing for a long time. As an activist, or just as someone who cares about, again, your climate, your community, your social, however you define social justice or whatever, it can be easy to slip into conversations that are really, really abstract. Like, if only people would like stop thinking about the world like this and start thinking about it like this. Like, no, that's not where activism comes from. Like, activism comes from people who are imperfect, who make mistakes, who don't know everything all the time, just getting together and brainstorming and thinking of a plan and moving on that plan. Like, that's where change comes from. And the same thing, just rejecting this idea of like conspiracy theories. Like, I'm sure there are definitely conspiracy theories out there, and like, you know, COINTELPRO, that was something that actually happened and was true. But for the most part, a lot of these conspiracy theories are distractions from actual problems that people aren't even trying to cover them up. So that's a song I've been writing for a long time, and I'm glad it's done now. It's on the album if you want to check it out. I have a bunch more, but any thoughts, questions about either of those two pieces? Keeping in mind that I can't see you if you raise your hand, although I can see you.
So besides like the pace and obviously you rhymed a little bit more in your rap, what's the difference for you expressing yourself through those two mediums?
You know, yeah, I wasn't planning on talking a ton about like the aesthetics, but I think that's a really cool question because for me, the difference between poetry and rapping, like, you know, obviously rapping is a kind of poetry. For me, when I do spoken word, it usually doesn't rhyme. It's usually, you know, theater-based, like I'm a character or whatever. But the difference is purely aesthetic. You can talk about whatever you want in any way. The only thing is rapping always rhymes. It has to rhyme. 99% of the time it's to a beat. Like, I'm performing it a cappella, but like that's a song that has a beat. It's a really good beat too. There's a hook. I didn't do the hook, but there's a hook on it too. So it rhymes, there's a beat, and it's to a set tempo. You know, usually 4/4 times, somewhere between 80 and 120 beats per minute, like usually. Whereas poetry is much more open, free verse, whatever. And so I find that, again, when we think about like cultural change. Like, there are times where I'm up in front of 1,000 people and like I can say something to them and maybe they'll listen to me. Or times when I'm up in front of 20 people or 100 people or whatever, and the context is always different. So sometimes a song because it's going at a tempo, it tends to be a little more blunt. Like, that song wasn't a super interesting story or anything, it was just me kind of yelling at you. And like, that might not make the most beautiful poetry, but it can be effective in the right context. Whereas the poetry, because it's so loose and there aren't any rules to it, at least the stuff that I do, it allows me to kind of explore in different ways, if that makes sense. Explore, hopefully a little deeper and more subtle. Cool. I got a few more. Alright, so again, sometimes before we get to any of this stuff, as activists or as people who do stuff, it's important to have perspective and to really step back from everything you're doing on the day-to-day level and see the big picture, if you can, which is hard sometimes, but it's important to at least try. And this is a poem about kind of the first time where I really had that type of conscious experience, or that type of consciousness. Jackie's been here for 25 years, and he tells me you get used to it. He says your nose learns to seal itself when you dive headfirst into an ocean of dust. Your eyes develop nicotine membranes, keep the chemical sprays out in your hands. They will grow their own gloves, invisible and tough, permanent. I've been a janitor for 3 weeks, and I thought I was made of stronger materials. We played chess in the break room. Jackie asked me what my favorite piece is, and I say, it's the pawn, because, he's the underdog. The odds are against him. Yeah, Jackie identifies with the pawns too, but he sees nobility in their sacrifice. He sees beauty in their simplicity and the fact that they're always moving forward. Jackie shambles from room to room, moving half as fast as me, but somehow getting twice as much done. The night shift will mess with your head like that. Jackie smiles. Saddest face I've ever seen. Sometimes I see that face and imagine that we are the servants entombed alive with the Pharaoh, polishing someone else's gold while our oxygen runs out, dutifully preparing a grand feast for a God who will never be hungry. Jackie says there is honor in this, good day's work, and honest living. There is poetry in this, but what kind of poetry lives in a can of orange naturalizer? The liquid breath of dragons. The mist dissolves every word, creeping up my throat, overwhelms every idea. They got me wiping my reflection from the glass. They got me scrubbing the shadows off the walls. They got me so scared of my alarm clock that I can't fall asleep anymore. Even when my muscles drain out from under my fingernails and my thoughts stream out of my ears and I'm left with nothing but 2 eyes that refuse to close for fear of what they might dream. Is there really honor in this? Or is that abstract concept the carrot they dangle in front of us pawns to move us across the board? See, Jackie says he can't think about it like that. He says that without us, the people who live and work in this building couldn't function, that we keep the gears turning, and it might not be glamorous, but it's necessary. And I mean, yeah, maybe he's right. Maybe I am just a working class kid who somehow hustled my way into college and got delusions of grandeur. Maybe now I think I'm too good to go into the family business. 100 generations of janitors and farmers and infantry and factory workers and pawns. So I suck it up and last for 2 more months. And on my final day before an uncertain future, I make a point to shake Jackie's hand and I say, I've been thinking, man. I think the reason pawns can't move backwards is because if they could, they'd kill their own kings in a heartbeat. Instead, we are forced to keep moving, believing we can get to the other side and become royalty ourselves, but most likely dying on the way there, sacrifice for a cause we don't even understand. I wish you the best, man. I wish you horses and castles. And Jackie smiles, saddest face I've ever seen. He disappears into his work. Yeah, So, but I do have a few that I'll do. But again, that piece, I think it's easy to misinterpret. Like, there is honor in every type of work, but I think it's important to step back and see, who's benefiting the most from our work. Is the relationship what it needs to be for that, honor or whatever to be fully realized? But that's part of a whole like one-man show I have about class consciousness and working class identity and blah blah blah. So we won't get too much into that. But again, just this idea of perspective. When you're talking about environmental justice or campus climate or any of the many issues that we've talked about here, it's important to try to step back, separate yourself from it a little bit, not completely, but try to see the whole picture. But like, that's kind of abstract. Hopefully it means something to you. Let's see. I guess shifting gears a little bit, because I don't want to, like, a lot of the poems that I wanted to do are kind of like, that's similar to that tonally, so I'll do something different. Talking about particularly the second one, but again, the second one and the fourth one are really interrelated, interpersonal change and long-term cultural change. It's just a matter of scope, right? And so this poem I'm gonna do is the only thing I've ever had to really go viral on the internet. And it's not because it's a great poem or anything, it's just because it hit a lot of people in a particular way at a particular time. And that is part of creating interpersonal or long-term cultural change, is understanding the context, like what we just talked about, and hopefully hitting it if you're an artist. And this is a poem based, it's a poem about like masculinity and the construction of gender and these types of kind of big abstract social justice issues. But again, one thing an artist does is try to take these big issues and make them smaller, make them manageable, make them make sense. And so this poem is a response to well, it's not just this, but the most specific example is the beer commercials, the Miller Lite commercials that were like about man up. Do you remember that? Anybody remember that? Yeah. Like, if you watch football, you've seen it a million times. But it's not just those commercials. Like, man up is a phrase that is used all the time, right? And it's you could say, oh, it just means take responsibility. It's not gender. But it is gender, because it's man up. And so I just think it's kind of insulting. And this poem is called 10 Responses to the Phrase, Man Up. 1, fuck you. 2, if you want to question my masculinity, like a schoolyard circle of curses, like a sword fight with lightsaber erections, save your breath. Because contrary to what you may believe, not every problem can be solved by growing a pair. You cannot arm wrestle your way out of chemical depression. The CEO of the company that just laid you off does not care how much you bench, and I promise there is no light beer in the universe full-bodied enough to make you love yourself. 3, man up, oh. That's that new superhero, right? Mild-mannered supplement salesman Mark Manstrong says the magic words man up and then transforms into the 5 o'clock shadow. The massively muscled, deep-voiced, duster-wearing Superman who defends the world from, I don't know, feelings. 4, now, like, I don't drink a lot of beer, because I'm not a real man, but I'm pretty sure that of all the beers in the world, Miller Lite is not the most flavorful. It kind of tastes like whatever insecure ad executive wrote these man-up commercials, got rejected by a beautiful, no-nonsense bartender, drank a 6-pack of real beer alone in his apartment, and then Miller bottled his tears. 5. You ever notice how nobody ever says woman up? They just imply it, because women and the women's movement figured out a long time ago that being directly, explicitly ordered around by commercials, magazines, and music is dehumanizing. When will men figure that out? 6, the phrase man up implies that competence and perseverance are uniquely masculine traits. That women, not to mention any man who doesn't eat steak, drive a big truck, and have lots of sex with women are nothing more than anything, though it suggests that to be yourself, whether you wear skinny jeans, listen to Lady Gaga, rock a little eyeliner, drink some other brand of light beer, or write poetry will cost you 7. How many boys have to kill themselves before this country acknowledges the problem? how many women have to be assaulted, how many trans people have to be murdered. We teach boys how to wear the skin of a man, but we also teach them how to raise that skin like a flag and draw blood for it. 8. Boy babies get blue socks. Girl babies get pink socks. What about green? What about orange? What about purple? What about black? What about cerulean, tie-dyed, buffalo plaid, rainbow 9? I want to be free to express myself. Man up. I want to have meaningful emotional relationships with my brothers. Man up. I want to be weak sometimes. Man up. I want to be strong in a way that isn't about physical power or dominance. Man up. I want to cry if I feel like crying. Man up. I want to talk to my father about something other than sports. Man up. I want to be who I am. Man up. 10. No. Again, a lot of the impulse behind that piece was just number 2, wanting to have a conversation with, I teach in schools and community centers and stuff all around Minnesota and sometimes in Wisconsin, but like, I work with a lot of boys, and we all, no matter how we identify in terms of our gender, get these type of messages that, in order to be a real man, you have to look like this, eat this kind of food, drive this kind of car. In order to be a real woman, you have to look like this, smell like this, act like this, blah, blah, blah. And the idea of that, I'm sorry, but I'm like explaining the poem, which is horrible. But, obviously there's no one way to be who you are. And I think these gender roles and gender boxes that we're all put in, it starts out as something kind of like funny and goofy, and like, oh, this is stupid. But it leads to real impactful pain and suffering and death. So an important part of creating long-term cultural change is making the connections between little things and big things. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions, rebuttals, expletives? So I have a few more. I'll keep going until the food gets here. There's gonna be food. All right, I'll do this piece. This is one that is really explicitly tied to this framework. And in particular, how many of you identify in some way as an activist? A bunch of people in the back, a couple people. How many of y'all are freshmen? So there's time. I didn't really do anything until I was older. I lifted weights and hung out with my friends until I was 19, 20, and then I started to get involved in stuff. Not there's anything wrong with lifting weights and hanging out with your friends, but again, it's really important to get involved if you care about your community or whatever. Getting involved in any sort of activist organization or community organization or cultural organization is great. Not just on some altruistic, save the world type of stuff, but for yourself. The more you get involved, the better your experience will be at school. The more contacts you'll make and the more fun you'll probably have, and that kind of stuff is really important. But anyways, one thing that some of the activists in the room might be able to relate to is this idea of sometimes there's a tension between wanting to do positive interpersonal change work and wanting to create institutional change. I think a good example of that is I have a friend who volunteers at the homeless shelter, regularly, almost every day out of the week. And he loves it. He does really positive, important, powerful work at that shelter. But he's still there every day, which means it's not making the problem go away. It doesn't mean that what he's doing doesn't have worth, that it isn't important, because it is, but it's not creating the institutional change. And so there's a tension there. Again, neither one of them is more important or less important than the other. We need both, but it can be hard as one individual to figure out what your role is in that. So that's what this poem is about. I'm standing in a school or a a submarine. Everything is gray and the walls can almost kiss each other. Children avalanche around my legs, falling into one another, their faces erased by their sheer numbers. It is too dark here. My job these days is to turn all the lights on and pretend to be brave. We smell like unused paintbrushes. The air is still, hanging just over this river or this sewer pipe full of hands and shoes and teeth. I see a teacher in a window, a smiley face painted onto a crash test dummy. I forget where I'm going. These children will grow up to be scarecrows. These children will snarl once at the world and be put down. These children will grow into the poems written about them, live in the space between the letters, and shiver when the books open. And my job these days is to melt the winter with a flashlight. I work in after-school program purgatory, moving from school to school, siphoning tears and collecting poems, keep the poems in a shiny leather briefcase. I dump the tears out in the parking lot. And my job these days is to identify bodies. My job these days is to be the Disney World full-body suit Sisyphus. My job these days is to dream of starfish, tens of thousands smothered by the air on the beach, being pulled apart alive by the seagulls. I toss a few back into the ocean and people want to tell me that I'm making a difference. But there is no honor in triage, only necessity. And these children, they need something more than one more plucky white woman to pry them open and extract their genius, or one more straight-A Teach for America mirage trying to save them, or one more positive male role model teaching them how to write poetry. And my job these days is to be one more positive male role model teaching them how to write poetry, and it's killing me. A teacher once told me that this is the curse of direct service. We make a difference, just not enough of one. We are the bricks in a haunted house, doing an admirable job keeping the ceiling from collapsing, but not able to remove the evil from the air. And my job these days is to be a hack exorcist. My job these days is to be a superhero in a coma, strip mall Santa Claus. My job these days is to blindly feel my way through the jagged corners of these schools and not bleed too much. And suddenly I remember where I'm going. A guidance counselor who is concerned that one of my students might be unstable because she wrote a poem about death, not knowing that death and suffering are pretty much all 13-year-olds write about. But on my way to the office, an impossibly small boy from one of my sessions cannonballs through the crowd, hits me in the shoulder and says, "Thank you." His name is Brian. He says, "Thank you," and means it, and I'm stuck. Somewhere between "you're welcome" and "I'm sorry." I'm stuck staring at banners. Attitude is everything. No child left behind. I love my school. I'm stuck. And my job these days is not to make a difference. It is to fight with everything I have for a world in which I don't have to. My job these days is to try and find a way to be both brick and builder, to teach starfish to fly. That's another piece that took a really long time to write because it's complicated. You know, like I don't even really know how I feel about it all the time. And I always worry that like people who do, you know, good work, like teachers or youth workers or social workers, like aren't gonna like that poem, but they always do because I think it's something that we all struggle with. This idea we want to change not just our own, the people in front of us, but we want to change the way it works, like the system, right? And it can be hard. But you know, we need teachers. We need teachers, but we also need principals. We need volunteer tutors, but we also need educational policy majors. We need people who write curriculum. We need lobbyists who push for certain types of curriculum with the government. We need politicians who blah, blah, blah. So there are places along that line where everyone can fit in. And it's just a matter, I think, of figuring out what you're best at and how you fit into this framework in the most productive way. Does that make sense? Are there any thoughts? Yeah.
So why should we do those things that aren't really changing anything? Like the situation isn't getting better, and it's just staying the same. Why should we do it?
That's a good question. Does anybody have a thought? Yeah, I have a thought, but
guess is the hope. I mean, you can't really do much more knowing. I mean, I don't know what to do.
Any other? Any other thoughts?
I mean, it's small, but it's still a large number of people that you get to put a provoking thought in their head to start an idea that might become something. And, you know, for teachers, I guess, year after year after year, if you put a thought in even just one person's head, that person might put it into another person's head, and the snowball effect hopefully takes off.
I mean, I think contextually, there are probably, I can't think of one, but there probably are examples of when we should not be doing the day-to-day work. But I think when it comes to like, you know, youth work, like we need tutors and teachers and social workers and blah, blah, blah. Like no matter what the larger contextual, you know, situations, we still need those people to be doing that work. I think the one thing I try to remind people with this whole framework idea is just to not forget about number 3. Because again, we don't all have to become educational policy people or curriculum writers. Many of us can become teachers, but I think there's a tendency in this country, especially, to put all of the weight in terms of creating change on interpersonal relationships, and also on voting. You know, just my quick little voting spiel, because the election is coming up. Like, voting is really important. It's a really important thing that we all should go out and do. You know, vote, whatever. But voting by itself doesn't change anything. Voting helps create a climate in which change can be more or less easy, if that makes sense. Like the second piece I did, the rap, you know, politicians don't do anything without communities of people pushing them and pressuring them to do stuff. And so I think a lot of times the weight is on voting, and it's also on, you know, face-to-face, like we all make a difference a little bit at a time, and then everything will be cool. But even though we need this and we need voting, we also need to not lose sight of this question. So I don't think it's, you know, it's a simple answer, but it's a question of how do we create institutional change? How do we not just, you know, volunteer at the homeless shelter, but make it so we don't need a homeless shelter anymore? How do we, you know, not just tutor kids, but make it so what they're learning in school is relevant to their lives, and so they want to learn what they're learning instead of being pressured into learning it. Not just, you know, how do we make sure the park doesn't have trash in it, but, you know, how do we fight global warming or whatever? Like, there's the big picture and the little picture, and they're both important, but I don't know. Like, it's a really good question. And I think, again, contextually, it's going to be different. But are there any other thoughts on that? This is a huge, huge, like, debate or argument or thing to think about.
It seems like it kind of relates to the difference in perspective between those two custodians about the pond. You know, I mean, are you just kind of getting pushed around and moved around, or are you out there making that noble sacrifice so that the people behind you can finish the job?
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. Because yeah, that's good to have the analysis that involves history too. So it's not just you in the moment, but what are you doing for the people who come after you doing the same thing? And like, you know, there are levels to this too. It's not just interpersonal change, institutional change. There's all kinds of gray area in between. That's good. Any other thoughts, questions? Cool. I'll have a couple more too, and then we can, you know, maybe take a. Or no, I'm gonna do maybe just a couple more, and then I wanted to share before I leave, because again, what I mentioned before, a lot of these conversations about activism and about social justice can get really abstract. And I worry that, you know, even this it can be kind of abstract for a lot of people. And so I wanted to just share like 5 things that any individual can do to have a concrete impact on their lives and in their community. So that's what I'll end with, and then we'll eat some, I don't know what it's going to be, hopefully it's cookies. And then hang out, and, you know, if there are any questions, answer. But let's see. I wanted to do this piece because it's a tougher one to remember. But yeah, talking about campus climate and making the campus a good place for everyone, a fun place, a productive place for everyone. Part of that means that those of us who hold privilege, whether white privilege or straight privilege or cisgender privilege or gender privilege or, you know, like male privilege or whatever. And I hold, you know, all of those to some extent. That we think about that and we internalize it and understand how that affects our relationships and how that affects the way that we move through this and how that affects other people too. And so this is a poem about being a white rapper. I don't really identify as like 100% white, but I'm white enough. I look white. So this is a poem about being a white rapper. A pocket full of props, quick pound and a handshake. A free mixtape, a highway through a landscape. As far from the Bronx as heaven is. Moment of uncertainty, moment of clarity, and a moment of hesitance. A buy with a spark of truth, a couple Sharpies, party music and the Carter 2. Lab cap in California, Illmatic and headshots. A couple of handbills left in the back of a rest stop. But rhyme book is sticking with my name on it, sticking through the rain, washing all the other flies down with the up, fitted to the side by the water, last minute to the side, set list, rep this, living for the rhyme, but more so for what that rhyme represents. 45 minutes of our lives to connect. Broken hearts over break beats, live and direct from the belly of the beast, striving to get free. Confessions of a white rapper. 1. KRS-One says there are 9 elements of hip-hop, a solar system of art and fashion and innovation orbiting an inferno. Some promoters will book me over a black rapper because they don't want to attract the wrong element. 2. It is easier for me to get a buzz going because most bloggers, radio DJs, music journalists, publicists, videographers, and booking agents are white. Like I said, I don't even really identify as Caucasian. I'm mixed, but that usually doesn't fit on the flyer. 3. Listeners who are often white and identify with me because of it actively seek out meaning in my music rather than just looking for a good beat to dance to. And I will readily admit, I am very good. But is that talent the reason you bought my CD? The reason you come to my shows? The reason you want this interview? I will never know. 4. I can code switch on a dime. We developed warp technology years ago and will leave this solar system as soon as we find a more fashionable one. 5. My music can be perceived as rebellious because it's hip-hop, but safe because of my skin. Fans and listeners get to engage with an oppositional culture without ever leaving their racialized comfort zones. Tarzan is the king of the jungle. Tom Cruise is the last samurai. Michael J. Fox goes back in time and invents rock and roll in 1955. 6. The thing about stealing, a little more. And we all know it's not wrong to steal to feed your starving family, and white kids in America are hungry. Whose food are they eating? Whose food are you eating? Whose food am I eating? 7. So maybe white people don't belong in hip-hop, but white people don't really belong in America when you think about it. So the question remains, how do we move forward? How do we define progress? 8, when I say one small step for man, you say one giant leap for mankind. Just remember whose planet you're standing on. 9, the code of the white rapper is this. Know the history, build community, put people on. And if they ever make you a monument, scratch your name out, break it, spit on it, burn it. We are not tourists, but we are also not the native inhabitants of this land. Aliens, invaders, put your hands up. Put your fucking hands up. That one is a little intense sometimes, but again, just kind of a good introduction to privilege. And I think if you really care about campus climate, you have to understand privilege, and you have to understand oppression, and all that kind of stuff, and how you fit into that. Again, it's not just white people, it's men, straight people, cisgender people, people with class privilege, you know. Which doesn't just mean rich either, it means, you know, comfortable, it can mean a lot of different things. So we all fit into that matrix somehow, and it impacts how we move through this campus. I got just 2 more quick ones, and then we can hang out and eat. I'll do them, and then we can do questions, all of us, if there are questions. Is that cool? Or is there anything with that piece that people are dying to know about? All right. I want to share just my favorite poem. It's not mine. I didn't write it. It's a poem by a writer named Marge Piercy. It's called The Low Road. And for me, it completely encapsulates everything that we've been talking about. This is kind of like my mantra as an activist. It's kind of long, but it's still a mantra for me as an activist. Again, it's called The Low Road. It's by Marge Piercy. You can Google her or whatever. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up. They can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember, they can take your child, wall up your lover, they can do anything you can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. Two people fight, back to back. Can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and build a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity in your own newsletter. 10,000 power in your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on, one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. And each day, you mean one more. Again, I love that piece because I think the main challenge of a poet, especially a poet who talks about political stuff and whatever, is to put a human face on these big abstract issues, and I think that piece does that really well, at least for me. So I hope you like it again, Marge Piercy. I'm sorry. The one I want to end with is pretty short, but there was one other one that I think is important to, because I haven't done it here before, I don't think, and it's pretty new, but it cuts to a lot of what we've been talking about. So, I'm sorry. So this is a piece about the responsibility that privileged people have to fight against injustice. Like a lot of times when we talk about, say, women's issues, you know, a lot of times women are expected to do the fighting. I think it's important that women are like in leadership roles and all that stuff, but, you know, quote unquote women's issues are men's issues too, right? Quote unquote issues of students of color are white students' issues too. It affects everyone. It affects people in different ways, but it affects everyone. And sometimes it can be really important for, you know, the people who aren't expected by society to fight back, because they can fight different battles at the same time. And this is a piece, you know, specifically about that. In regards to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't explain so much, but a piece about that in regards to the issue of sexual assault and sexual violence, which is always an issue everywhere. So. There was a conversation that never happened. Not even a deleted scene, more like the storyboard lost, an idea cut from the first draft. You are co-starring, slouched on a futon when we watched the game, telling me about your new girlfriend, or more specifically, what you're going to do to your new girlfriend. Action. And part of me still remembers my lines, even though I never said them. That conversation I just couldn't start for fear of embarrassment or losing our friendship, or maybe just because the commercials were over. That one tiny gesture that might not have changed anything, but might have. I remember how I never put my drink down, never muted the TV, and never said, man, the way you talk about her, the way you treat her, your hands are getting too big for your heart. I can smell the future you on your breath. She isn't safe for me. Now it's 2 weeks later, and we're standing in my kitchen, that same silence between us. She didn't want to press charges, so you're a convict with sledgehammer hands and no boulders to break them on, and I am thinking about how we used to play football together. Numbers 55 and 56, both inside linebackers. I am remembering the dozens of conversations that never happened, the words oversleeping in the bed of my lungs. I am the least important person in this story, and part of me wants to believe that you wouldn't have listened anyway, that some evil spirit whispered itself into your skull. Part of me wants to believe that we didn't grow up 3 blocks from each other, that our eyes aren't the same color. Part of me is always filming that scene, always repeating those lines, always reminding myself that despite this guilt, I'm not a bad guy. You tell me that she never said no, that you're sorry, that you're not a bad guy. Rape culture is silence. It is being able to see the future, not doing anything about it. It is believing the fairy tale platitude that there are good people and bad people, and that as long as you're not one of the bad people, your job is done. Your conscience is clear. It is all of us swimming through the same polluted waters of beer commercials policing masculinity, and stand-up comedians making rape jokes to sound edgy, and media talking heads blaming the victim, and music turning women into disposable sex objects. It is language encouraging us to think of sex as violence, fuck, hit, bang, smash. It is telling our daughters to dress sensibly and not walk alone at night, and telling our sons it is a conversation that never happened. And this is not an excuse for you. It is a reminder for me that while her silence will always mean no, my silence between us, will always mean yes. One more, but again, that piece really trying to illustrate that all of this stuff, it takes intentionality. It takes actively being for or against something, not passively being for or against something. If we care about something, whatever that issue is, it is so important that we are actively doing stuff to address that issue, whether that's having conversations with friends, or joining an organization, or reading up about it, or whatever, any of the stuff that we've talked about. It takes yourself taking that first step. You know, it doesn't just happen magically by itself. So sometimes, you know, in terms of that poem, like those conversations that happen, again, whether it's about the potentiality of sexual assault, or whether it's about racist jokes, or whether it's about whatever issue or idea, it can be a hard conversation to have, but that's why it's important. You know? And those little things can make huge differences. The idea of a ripple effect. So, I'm gonna do one more, something hopefully ending on a bit of a higher, a lighter note, or a more hopeful note. This is a song, again, it's on my new album. I should just real quick to self-promote. I'm a rapper, I've been rapping for a long time. I'm in a group called Guante and Big Cats. Big Cats is the producer. He just put out a brilliant solo instrumental hip-hop album. But he produced my whole album. It's called You Better Weaponize. I don't know if any of you follow indie hip-hop or Twin Cities hip-hop or whatever, but it features Toki Wright from Rhyme Sayers, Christoph Crane, Chastity Brown, who's one of the best singer-songwriters in the country, Crescent Moon from Kill the Vultures, a whole bunch of really amazing people, and I'm really proud of it. It's the best thing I've ever done as an artist. And it's rapping, it's not poetry, so there's music, the whole thing is music, it's really pretty. And really addresses a lot of stuff we talked about. Like, the song is about activism, there's a song about the politics of sexuality, a song about being mixed race, a song about white privilege in hip-hop, a song about whatever you're interested in. So please check it out. It's actually not being released for another 2 weeks, but because I don't come here that much, if you want one, will be your only chance to buy it until it's available online, election day. So you can wait if you want, but it'll be the cheapest here, and I get all the money. So if you liked anything I did, because when you sell stuff online, you don't get that whole thing. But anyway, if you like anything I did, I can personally guarantee that you'll like the album even more. Like, it's, again, the best thing I've ever done. I really hope you check it out. But I'll shut up. This is a song. This is on the album. I'll do it a cappella, but it's a song with Chassis on the album. It's called Lightning. I was struck by lightning. Not as a figure of speech, I was literally struck by lightning. It smells like a hospital on fire. Like the cleanest smoke you can imagine, like spring water pulled apart by the atoms. It smells like recycled air on an airplane crashing. What are the odds? Didn't give me superpowers. So I guess I gotta take my chances with small talk, weather reports and high traffic, with time clocks and time bombs and time passing. When I'm not here anymore, will my planet even notice my absence? I swear. Some days are like carving your name into the Capitol with just your fingernails while the politicians laugh at you, and some days are worse. I want to leave a legacy so they'll remember me for more than this verse. Please, hold your applause. Hold it forever. There's so much that keeps us apart and so little that holds us together. But whatever that is, we're going to need it. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And it only gets better when we do better. And we only do better when we fuse together. Yes, there's no progress without struggle. Whether you're an activist or just a kid in some trouble, a student graduating with debt, a single mother depressed, a little brother repressed, ripping the sun as it sets into a habit hidden under the bed, will four walls echo something I said when dark clouds gather. Remember to just fight back. Not everyone can be touched or struck like that and survive. But you did. You still got a spark inside. So use it. See, I've learned a little bit about energy. I've learned when it enters you, it loses charge. So the negative and positive are worth the same amount. The passion and the pain, the smiles and the scars. Whether you lost your job or won the lottery, that energy enters you like a lightning bolt. And no matter how dark its origin, once it's inside you, it's yours to control. So what this means is that those who've been through the most have the most to let go. There is strength in our anger, power in our pain, even beauty in the hourglass's grains. It all depends on how we use it. Some people make music. Some people make excuses. Some people make enemies. Some make believe. Some people make the most of every tragedy. And me, I just want to make a scene. Ain't gonna patiently wait for my pain to bury me. Ain't gonna waste all this energy chasing popularity or prosperity. I'd rather stand tall in solidarity with everyone we've lost because they never lost. And every one of y'all who stays forever strong. And we'll build bass lines out of thunder, rap to the rhythm of the rain, and dance on the little bit of space that we have and build something lasting as this empire's collapsing. And when they ask me to come along quietly, I'll say, how can I quit? I got lightning inside of me. Let me just say too, if you don't have money and you can't buy the CD, one, you can buy it online when it comes out in a couple of weeks. But two, grab a flyer. My website has almost every poem I did tonight. There's a video of it, so if you like it, please watch it, post it on Facebook, Tumblr, like share it with your friends. It really means a lot. I also have a bunch of essays, like all of this stuff is on my website too. So grab a flyer. The flyer is for my release party, which is in Minneapolis in a couple of weeks. If you want to go to that, but my website is at the bottom of it. It's just guante.info. Also, Twitter, Facebook. Let's be friends or whatever. Are there any last thoughts or questions before we break?
Are you supposed to tell us 5 things that we can do?
Oh, I'll make it quick, so I know some of y'all are getting antsy. Because again, we don't want to make this too abstract, right? I wrote an article about this too, which is on my website, so I might run over some of it. Y'all can check it out later. But I think looking at this framework, one, the first one I have here is to challenge yourself, be intentional, develop empathy, make good choices, which is not concrete, I'll admit. But that again, if there's something you care about, one, challenge yourself to find something that you care about, whether that's a political issue or a social issue or a community or whatever. Challenge yourself. Read about it, think intentionally about it, figure out how you fit into that. Just take the time. A lot of it is just taking the time. That's the most abstract one, I'm sorry. Number two is to be the media. Because again, I think no matter whether you're a liberal or a conservative or anywhere in between, like none of us trust the media, right? The media is pretty messed up. So be the media means, you know, blog. Blogging, again, gets a bad rap sometimes, but can be really powerful. Social media, utilize, again, having 300 friends on Facebook is power. If you can post a link to something, to amplify maybe someone else's voice, or have your own voice amplified, that's power. It doesn't change the world by itself, but this type of independent media can be really, really powerful. Number 3 I have is connect the really big issues to some of the really small issues. So, like, y'all know Dessa, the rapper? She tweeted the other day, like, I really care about what's going on in Syria. I don't know what to do about it. Like, wow, that's really big, right? Like, and I think many of us feel like that sometimes. Like, there's some type of big world issue. We want to do something, but we don't know how. I think the best way to do that is to take these big issues and figure out how they connect to local issues or community issues or smaller issues. So a couple of examples, just to make that more clear, is let's say you don't like how Israel treats the Palestinians. I don't, like, again, I'm not going to get too political or whatever, but you can, you know, hold a big rally to demand that the U.S. cut aid to Israel, or you can engage in a targeted, tactical, like, divestment campaign, which is what they did during, you know, South African apartheid. They forced American corporations and companies to not invest in South Africa, to keep money out of going to South Africa, and it worked. It's one example. So, like, you can, you know, let's say you're an anti-war person. You can protest war, or you can protest a specific war by having a rally, or you can, you know, set up a counter-recruitment booth at a local high school, where like the military is recruiting. You can set up a booth next to it saying, like, here are reasons why you shouldn't join the military. Just as an example. You know, you can say, I'm against racism, and you can, you know, be not racist, which is great, or you can organize a weekly facilitated discussion where you and your neighbors can talk about your experiences and build and ask questions and you know, do something. There's a difference between supporting LGBTQ rights, voting for LGBTQ rights, and volunteering to campaign to get 1,000 people to vote for LGBTQ rights. That's more of a Minnesota-specific one, because we have a marriage amendment on the ballot. But now the bad kind of marriage amendment, the one that's, well, for me, the bad kind. So we're trying to vote it down. But one just passed here, what, 2 years ago? Or 4 years ago? Right? Wisconsin. But again, that, I mean, related to the election real quick. If any of you have a stake in the election, which you probably all do in some way, there's a huge difference between voting and getting everyone you know to vote, or talking to your family about voting, or whatever. Like, that's how elections are won. Not by you voting, but by you trying to get 15 people to vote, or 100 people to vote, whatever. So, the last one is, two more, real quick. One, y'all are in college right now. That is a place of tremendous potential power. You can go into a career field that is social justice oriented, or that is change oriented, or activist oriented. Because if you can be doing amazing work and get paid for it, like, that's a really good place to be. So consider, like, again, you're in college, you got to do what you love and do what you want to do, but consider some of these you know, jobs that make a really big impact, like urban planning, or curriculum development, or politics even, or law, or whatever. There are a million different ways you can do that. And then the last one, which we already talked about, is to join an organization. If you look at history, the only time that positive changes happen is when people have come together and organized. That's where change comes from. Not from politicians, not from artists, but from people organizing together. So I know we're at a college, there's all kinds of activist organizations. Again, no matter what your politics are, there are activist organizations out there who are doing something that you're interested in, so just get information on it. Talk to one of the people here. Go to a meeting. Sometimes it's that first step can change your whole life. So those are the 5, like, more or less concrete things that I think anyone can do to make the world better, however you define that. So, any other thoughts, questions?
I have a blurb. Gender and Sexuality Alliance's meetings are at 7 p.m. on Monday nights, 6 p.m. on Monday nights, in the Coffee Lounge in Secayfield. So come, we're friends.
Cool. Well, thank you for listening to me. Please talk. I'm going to hang out for a little while if you have other questions or whatever. Eat some food. And that's, again, please buy my CD. That's how I support myself. Like, I don't have a real job. I just do this and sell CDs. But if you don't, you know, grab a flyer or nothing else. Be my friend on Facebook or whatever. Thank you.
by lightning, not as a figure of speech.